Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Zarifa Baroud, and I'm so honored to be emceeing this event tonight. As many of you are probably aware, today we mark 1 year since the murder of George Floyd at the hands of U.S. police. Before we begin this event tonight, please join us in a moment of silence for George Floyd and his mourning family. Thank you, everyone. Tonight, we will be discussing our campaign, which aims to collect support for the sanctioning of Israel. Through this campaign, we call on the Biden administration to institute a complete arms embargo on Israel on the basis of their frequent human rights violations, as well as to cancel the US-Israel Free Trade Agreement, shut down so-called charitable organizations in the United States supporting Israeli war crimes, and ban the import of products from Israel's illegal colonies. This event and campaign comes at a very crucial time. While we witness the ethnic cleansing campaign in East Jerusalem, the desecration of Masjid al-Aqsa, and most importantly, the hundreds of Palestinians massacred, and yet our Israeli military terror campaign on Gaza. This is why we're here tonight. Just because of a so-called ceasefire, which was initiated by the Israeli regime, Palestine is still far from free. Israel continues its military occupation of the Palestinian territories, the siege on Gaza, and more recently, a mass arrest operation against Palestinian dissidents within Israel. Please support this campaign by going to sanctionisrael.org and signing our petition, letting the Biden administration know that we refuse to revert to the status quo. I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Josh Rubner, who is the Managing Director of American Muslims for Palestine and responsible for staff management and development and organizational planning and development. He is the adjunct faculty at Georgetown University, the senior principal of Progress Up Consulting, former policy director of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, and a former analyst in Middle East affairs at Congressional Research Service. Ruebner is the author of Shattered Hopes, Obama's Failure to Broker Israeli-Palestinian Peace, and Israel, Democracy or Apartheid State. His writings appear frequently in publications such as USA Today, the Los Angeles Times, The Hill, Huffington Post, and Mondowise. Please, everyone, welcome Josh.
Thank you so much, Zarifa. It's a pleasure to be with everyone here tonight, but I do have to start out on a very distressing and disturbing note, but a note that's not unsurprising given the Biden administration's record to date. As we found out today, the State Department approved an export license for $735 million more bombs to Israel. This approval of this export license comes despite the fact that we've seen unprecedented congressional opposition in recent days to arming Israel with more weapons to massacre the Palestinian people. This act by the Biden administration of approving the export of these bombs over congressional opposition adds another shameful mark to the Biden administration's record over the last several weeks. On 3 occasions, the Biden administration prevented the UN Security Council from meeting in order to impose a ceasefire. We saw the Biden administration repeatedly give Israel the green light to attack and obliterate entire Palestinian families through the specious claim of self-defense. At the same time that we're viewing the Biden administration's shameful record on this issue, we're also witnessing an unprecedented global civil society mobilization in support of Palestinian rights. This global mobilization is anchored by millions of resilient, triumphant Palestinians in the blockaded Gaza Strip, in the occupied West Bank, in the annexed East Jerusalem, second-class citizens of Israel, refugees denied their right of return, who are standing up and saying no more to Israel's settler colonial regime. This mobilization is being reinforced by millions of allies all over the world, taking to the street in an unprecedented display of solidarity with the Palestinian people. We're also seeing unprecedented support for Palestinian rights in public opinion. Now, public opinion polls are showing that Democrats and the youth support and sympathize with the Palestinian people more than Israel. This is groundbreaking. We're also seeing unprecedented action in support of Palestinian rights from members of Congress. Earlier this month, 25 representatives signed a letter to the State Department protesting against Israel's war crime of trying to forcibly expel Palestinians from their homes in Jerusalem. We are seeing members of Congress take to the floor of the House and the Senate and social media in unprecedentedly strong ways to back Palestinian rights. And most recently, we saw 16 members of Congress who stood up and said, no, Israel should not be getting more weapons at this point. In significant ways, the Biden administration is responding to this pressure. If you look at the Biden administration statements, you'll see that it is saying things like, we support equality between Palestinians and Israelis, and no longer saying that a two-state resolution is the only possible resolution. We're seeing the Biden administration support some humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. But this is not a result of the Biden administration growing a moral backbone. This is a result of the unprecedented pressure from you, the grassroots, and from our allies in Congress who are forcing the Biden administration to live up to its commitment to center human rights in our foreign policy. But the Biden administration wants to go back to the status quo. The Biden administration wants to go back to fruitless negotiations. But we're here to say tonight that returning to the status quo is simply not an option, because the status quo is Israeli settler colonialism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, military occupation, blockade, and war crimes. This is what the status quo is, and it is no longer acceptable to return to this status quo. Now is the time to go big and to go bold in our demands and to dream expansively for what we want to see. So what I encourage all of you watching is to go right now to sanctionisrael.org. There you can sign on to our petition to the Biden administration calling for it to sanction Israel, to end weapons deliveries to Israel, to support war crimes trials against Israel in the International Criminal Court, and to support Palestinian liberation and self-determination. While you're there on the website, you can also click to tweet at Secretary of State Blinken and express your disapproval with the State Department licensing more weapons to Israel to kill more Palestinians. And finally, we need to take to the streets. We hope that all of you will join us in Washington, D.C. this Saturday, May 29th, from 3 to 8 p.m. at the Lincoln Memorial for a national march on Washington to take these demands to Congress and to take these demands to the Biden administration. We'll see you on the streets on Saturday. Thank you very much.
For that moving speech. Next up, we have someone that I'm very honored to be introducing, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. Congresswoman Rashida represents Michigan's 13th Congressional District. Rashida Tlaib is a well-known progressive warrior and, in her own words, a mother working for justice for all. Her 2 young sons are at the root of her unwavering passion to help change lives for the better. She is the oldest of 14 children, born and raised in Detroit, and the proud daughter of Palestinian immigrant parents. Thank you so much, Rashida, for being here today.
Thanks, Sis, for inviting me, and thank you all so much for sharing this space or allowing me to be part of this space with all of you. I think as many of us continue this fight for true Palestinian liberation, please know that it is so critically important that we center so much of our work with Palestinian voices, people that are actually being impacted by the apartheid state and by the racism, discrimination, oppression, and violence. Israel needs to be held accountable, the exact same standards as many other countries need to be held accountable to. And the Palestinian people need to continue to be seen as human beings, as deserving human rights. And they are entitled, as you all know, many of you, the choir, but we need to actually say the words that Palestinians are entitled to the same human rights that you and I are entitled to. You cannot believe in and support human rights of all people, the equality of all nations, and fail to speak out against actions and policies of the Israeli state and the Israeli apartheid government. Silence, for many of us, we know it. It's been louder than you could imagine. Is really acceptance and silence and the continued support of billions of dollars of U.S. assistance to this continued oppression of Palestinian people is something that we need to continue to speak out and oppose. I think it's really important as, many of us, the numbers that continue to come out, I feel like doesn't give justice to those lives lost. And so when we see 248 people, we know that is as in addition to the thousands and millions of others directly impacted. And so I always tell colleagues when they ask me how my family is doing, I always tell them, they're safe at home, but I think of Yara and I think of Rullah. I think of these 2 children who now are not living because the United States funded the weapons and funded the attack on these children. And so it is important for us to continue to put a human face behind those numbers. So I'm asking all of you, all of our allies, our partners in this fight, that we need to continue to do that because, again, silence, but also the wording, the watering down of the mere existence of Palestinians in these communities that continue to be attacked. It is horrifying to see children being blindfolded, being arrested, seeing the folks that spoke out against forcing displacement of, residents in Jerusalem, people being forced out of their homes. Again, those folks need our help in humanizing who they are, that they are real people, some of which have been displaced and forced and refugees multiple times prior to this engagement and this violence by Israel. And so you all know myself and many of us in Congress are now speaking up. The Biden administration, yes, did approve $735 million in weapons and sales to Israel in the midst of all the horror that we have continued to see. This could have been used as leverage to push back against the apartheid, to push back against the racism. I have yet to hear the condemnation of death to Arab mobs in the streets. At the bare minimum, this arms sale should have been stopped, and there should have been hearings and transparency so that the American people can hear and understand what these weapons will be used for. Because what we've seen is they were used to bomb schools, they were used to bomb shelters, they were used to bomb medical institutions, residential buildings, and to kill hundreds of people, majority children. And so all of you know that you all have a partner in me, but know this, it is so critically important that much of the work done on the ground is connected to the oppression of others. I say this to you, my brothers and sisters, and all of you on this call. Do not stay silent when others in our community among us are also suffering the same kind of oppression. I think it's so critically important to connect our work together. That is what most racist, fascist, apartheid kind of governments will be most fearful of, is when we all come together against this form of, again, oppressive policies and this form of violence. So as I think of Yara and Rola and all of the children, I always am reminded, though, that as a granddaughter of my Siti and many and cousin and a niece to those still right now suffering under the illegal occupation of Israel and the apartheid policies, I am always reminded that we truly are seeds, and that we're growing this movement, that no matter how much they try to bury us or dehumanize or say we have no rights, we continue to grow and speak up. And what I love is I love seeing the Palestinian people standing up for lives like George Floyd, standing up for the separation of children at the border, standing up against those that are being denied access to water from here in Detroit to all the way to Gaza. That is how we build this movement, because that same pain that we continue to feel for our families, for our loved ones in Palestine, those are things that are happening right here at home, and we need to continue to speak up. So with that, I thank you all so much. Know again, our movement is growing. It is not something that will just instantly happen with who's in the White House or who is in Congress. It's us organizing in the streets. That is what's going to transform our policies around apartheid Israel. So thank you so much. I think you're muted, sis. I could be wrong. It's okay. I wanted to say something, but I wasn't sure if I could say. There you go.
I promise what I was saying was really powerful. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib for giving us her time tonight, and for speaking so powerfully about this subject that, is dehumanized by so many. So thank you so much for doing that. And please, I urge all of you to go to sanctionisrael.org and sign our petition, telling the Biden administration that we won't be complicit in Israeli war crimes any longer. I'm super excited to also introduce our next speaker, Zaha Hassan, who is a human rights lawyer and visiting fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Her research focus is on Palestine-Israel peace, the use of international legal mechanisms by political movements, and U.S. foreign policy in the region. Previously, she was the coordinator and senior legal advisor to the Palestinian negotiating team during Palestine's bid for UN membership, and was a member of the Palestinian delegation to Quartet-sponsored exploratory talks between 2011 and 2012. Welcome, Zaha.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Thanks to AMP and to the organizers for inviting me, and thank you all for taking time for this event. I thought I'd start off by giving you a briefing on where the Biden administration landed with respect to its engagement on Israel-Palestine following the bombardment of Gaza, and then share with you a new policy paper that the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and U.S. Middle East Project jointly published, recommending where the Biden administration should go to change the status quo between Israelis and Palestinians and end the violence that the people of Gaza and Palestinians writ large experience from occupation and various Israeli practices to fragment Palestinians and undermine their rights, including their right to return. First, despite the administration's best efforts not to engage too heavily on Israel-Palestine, the situation on the ground has now been bumped up on the U.S. foreign policy priority list for the Biden administration. That doesn't mean the administration has developed a defined policy goal or a strategy for that matter. Secretary Blinken talked with the Palestinian president in Ramallah today. He promised to move forward with opening a consulate in Jerusalem and to encourage Israel to maintain the status quo at the Haram al-Sharif. He said he discussed the forced removal of Palestinian families from Sheikh Jarrah and he promised to increase aid to the Palestinians and to encourage Arab donor countries to restart assistance to Palestinians. What was not discussed was ending the Israeli military occupation or the blockade over Gaza. Instead, the Biden administration's support for a two-state solution was reaffirmed. You can bet there was no discussion either about how U.S. weapons are being misused by Israel to maintain its occupation and violate Palestinian human rights. That's where grassroots organizing has to come into play. Over 20 years ago, after the start of the second Palestinian uprising called the Al-Aqsa Intifada, I came to Washington, D.C. to talk to members of Congress about a report co-authored with other lawyers from the National Lawyers Guild. We looked at the use of U.S. weapons, including Apache helicopters and missiles, to assassinate Palestinians. I was chased out of some offices and verbally abused in others. A lot has changed since then. We now have, members of Congress like Representative Tlaib and others that are calling for centering human rights and calling for accountability in weapons transfers to Israel. That is an important milestone. But a complete policy shift is needed towards U.S. engagement on Israel-Palestine. That is what a paper from the Carnegie Endowment is calling for. The paper is titled Breaking the Israel-Palestine Status Quo, and it provides policy recommendations and an approach for the Biden administration and for future administrations to consider towards conflict resolution between Israelis and Palestinians. The report is one that focuses on the long game rather than on short-term fixes toward restarting peace talks. There is no two-state solution open for the taking at the moment, and likewise, a one-state solution that offers equal rights for all is just as unlikely. The paper is premised on the idea that Palestinians need protection and rights respected first, and that should be prioritized even if a political solution is not on hand. But to get policymakers in the U.S. to prioritize people will take changing the discourse, which is why the target audience of our report is you. Here is what we proposed in the paper and what we hope will guide civil society activism in terms of the big picture asks for policymakers. We say what is needed from U.S. engagement is the following. First, center rights and human security. Second, reaffirm the centrality of international law in peacemaking and roll back Trump administration actions and its Peace to Prosperity plan in its entirety. Third, clarify the expectations that the administration has for Israelis as well as Palestinians and back those up with the levers of U.S. policy. And fourth, work collaboratively with multilateral mechanisms and the UN so the rules-based international order is strengthened rather than undermined by U.S. engagement on a durable solution for Israelis and Palestinians. What do I mean by centering rights and human security? Something we refer to in the paper as a rights-based approach. We mean that there's been a deprioritization of rights in international law when thinking about a solution to the situation on the ground. In fact, policymakers have tended to believe that a focus on rights and freedoms guaranteed under international law, rights and freedoms contained in the Fourth Geneva Convention or in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, would undermine the chances for Israel to come to the negotiating table. The result was that settlement expansion was incentivized. Why should Israel stop building if it knew that the issue could be leveraged by promising to engage in a new round of negotiations? Or if it knew that the U.S. would ultimately accommodate its new facts on the ground by redefining peace parameters while also shielding Israel from accountability in the UN? But when we talk about centering rights, it isn't only the rights Palestinians should expect from the state of Israel, the occupying power. It's also about rights Israelis and Palestinians have with their own representative bodies. The warped incentive structure I just mentioned also impacts Israeli governance and empowers ultra-nationalist parties. The trend lines in Israel are in the direction of greater authoritarianism and denial of civil liberties and equal protection. We saw that in terms of the mob violence during the last month. The resurgence of parties advocating Jewish supremacy have been mainstreamed, and that these political parties now have seats in the Knesset shouldn't be surprising. In the occupied territories, the PA and the PLO have also sacrificed the rights and well-being of Palestinians in an attempt to conform to the image of a good peace partner. The Palestinian leadership has prioritized the peace process over working to strengthen the political and social cohesion of Palestinian society. The PA has also played to international donors and been led by donor support for state building under occupation rather than working to promote sustainable development or ways to support Palestinian families trying to stay in their homes. So what happens when we center rights? Do we all of a sudden get a peace agreement or a two-state solution or a one-state solution with equality for all? Of course not. What centering rights does do is it changes the political calculations of the parties so that over time they are encouraged to recalibrate their actions vis-a-vis each other and vis-a-vis their own constituencies. And when that starts happening, we have a much better chance of creating the kind of environment we need for a durable solution. What are some of the policy levers to change these political calculations? Some important ones with respect to Israel's conduct include conditioning U.S. security assistance on compliance with federal laws and human rights standards, and ending the U.S. practice of shielding Israel from accountability at the UN and at the International Criminal Court. Now, I want to be clear about two things here. This paper does not say, because I know there will be those who misinterpret our recommendations. We reject the idea that a rights-based approach undermines U.S. interests in the Middle East. Arguably, it's been the lack of centering of rights and human security in Israel and Palestine that has undermined U.S. interests for so many years. Recalibrating the approach now would restore U.S. credibility. It pulls the carpet out from under U.S. adversaries and enables the U.S. to reestablish respect for multilateral mechanisms that it once engaged in the resolution of other regional conflicts. We also reject the notion that the paper is out of touch with domestic realities. As Josh mentioned, there's a lot changing in the American electorate. We know from polling year after year that most Americans aren't prioritizing Palestine-Israel policy in their voting choice, but they do look for the package of values a candidate represents. And we know that 2/3 of Americans would like to see a neutral U.S. policy towards Israel-Palestine. Interestingly, just this March, Gallup polling showed that a majority of those polled in the Democratic Party, 53%, want the U.S. to put more pressure on Israel to make peace, a 10% increase just from a couple of years ago. However, the changes taking place in the electorate are not being reflected in U.S. policy. And that's why grassroots organizing like that from AMP is so critically important. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Zaha. That was very informative. And I think that we all were able to take a lot away from that. Next, we have such a great lineup tonight. So let's see. Next up, we have Imam Suhaib Webb, who is an adjunct assistant professor of public service of NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. He has a degree in education from the University of Central Oklahoma and in Islamic law at Al-Azhar University in Cairo. He was named as a faith leader to watch by the Center for American Progress in 2016, selected by the Muslim community as one of the CNN's 25 most influential leaders, as well as one of the 500 of the most influential Muslims scholar at NYU.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما غلق الخاتم لما سبق اللهم صل وبارك وسلم عليه في الأولين وفي الآخرين وفي الملأ الأعلى يا رب العالمين. First and foremost, thank you, Zarifa, and assalamu alaikum to everybody. Also, thank you to Representative Tlaib, as well as, alhamdulillah, all of the other speakers and participants in this evening's important cause. Before I get started, let me just answer the question that many people have been asking me now for a month, and that is, how can you help Palestine? And if you're in North America, I would suggest you join and become an active supporter of AMP. It's a very, very simple answer. Today, someone actually sent me a message and said, like, I wish I could do more. Oftentimes we become siloed in our passions, in our activism, and we fail to be able to see that there are actually people on the ground. And what was interesting about the conversation with someone that I had today was that they were suggesting things that AMP was already doing. So my response, I think I may have irritated the person, was just like, join AMP, follow AMP, join AMP, follow AMP. So if you're in the United States, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There is serious work happening, alhamdulillah, in many different layers of this effort. I just want to focus really on 4 things, many of which have already been highlighted, but I think are crucial areas that I think we have to think about as we move forward in our support for Palestinians and the rights of Palestinians and their rights to be treated as human beings. Our role as American Muslims is important, and we need to take it sincerely. And the first is education. We need to continue to amplify, and I think one of the great variables that changed how this conflict was received was the Palestinian activists on the ground, on Instagram Live, on Facebook Live, and people amplifying their images, their messages, and their words. And that made it very, very difficult for people to keep silent. A story that they know, if more people are aware of, it's going to touch their human core. It's going to compel them to be either deniers of basic human values and ideas that are shared across cultures and traditions and societies, or to become touched by this great crime of this era, which is happening in Palestine. So first is education, inviting speakers to your university campuses, making sure that you're sharing authentic information about what's happening in Palestine, working with organizations like AMP that are creating education resources for people to tell that story. And at a minimum, make sure that instead of, if you're not Palestinian, interjecting your voice into the situation, that you just share content that has been approved and shared by the larger Palestinian community. I think this is something that we have to be consistent in doing. The second thing is activism, and we know that there are some major pieces of activism that are going to be happening. I know here in DC, as well as other places. I know my own experience in organizing. When people show up, it makes a difference. So make sure that we show up when asked to act. Make sure that we engage, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, or even through demonstrations, to make sure that we are contributing, right, to and openly volunteering and engaging in opportunities for activism. It's extremely important. The third thing is to deal with the political component. And I think that, you know, what we often hear is that Israel needs to act like a state. And the irony here is that Israel is not treated as a state, right? It's not subjected to any laws, right? It's not held accountable for any of its human rights violations. It continues to ride roughshod over international law, as well as many of the things that in the United States we would consider illegal. For example, displacing someone from their home is something which is obviously illegal. The irony is that while Israel is free to act in any way that it wants and to eschew any kind of dedication to international agreements or domestic law, the opposite holds true for Palestinians. They are not afforded any basic legal protections. And I think the discussion about centering this on human rights and human beings and human protections is extremely important. The Palestinians should also be treated like a state in the sense that, for example, many of us in the beginning of Ramadan, we were hoping to be able to buy dates from Palestine. And I know many people actually ordered dates from Palestine, and those dates were withheld here in the United States. Some of them reached the United States, held by the United States Postal Service. The Palestinians are not recognized as a state that can trade. It has its own airport. It has its own travel. Palestinians cannot even fish for their own, their own lives, their own livelihood in the water areas that surround their country. So on one hand, you have Israel that is running over any type of legal kind of conditions of being a state, and you have Palestinians who are not allowed to experience basic laws that would allow them to understand what it is to be a state. There's two extremes here. And I think one of the things that we have to demand is that Israel is held accountable on its human rights record, on its political record, on things that it has continued to do throughout history, and that Palestinians, especially from the perspective of the United States and our government, are actually, if you want a two-state solution, then you can't just suddenly make a state. You have to start creating policies and mechanisms that allow something to slide into statehood. Until now, that doesn't exist. And I think that's a very important conversation, that Palestinians do not have the opportunity to even participate into the idea of what it means to be a state. So these are two areas I think that also we should think about. Israel's ability to run roughshod over any type of law. And this also pertains to most of the dictatorships in the Middle East, and the fact that Palestinians aren't able to enjoy the basic laws afforded to most political entities and states internationally. The fourth thing that I want to challenge us to think about, and I understand this may be somewhat concerning for people or controversial, is that we are well aware that the Jewish community spent years hunting down people who participated in the Holocaust, people who stole Jewish land, people who killed Jews, people who ran roughshod. I visited Birkenau. I've been there, and destroyed these people's lives. I think that American people in general, and especially the American Muslim community, has to begin to start to think, how do we organize illegally to hold people like Mr. Yaqub, who we saw taking the home of Palestinians in Sheikh al-Jarrah? How do we begin to create legal entities that are going to hunt these people down, especially if they're American citizens, and bring them to court and have them charged for crimes against humanity? This is something that we're not talking about, and this is something that I think that we have to do. We have to up the degree and sophistication of our activism, so that not only is it being felt at an educational layer, an activism layer, and a political layer, but also at a legal layer. If you're going to steal someone's home, if you're going to kill somebody and you're an American citizen overseas, you should be held accountable. Many of our famous charitable organizations and many active Muslims after 9/11 who had no relationship to terrorism across the world were shut down, were forced to leave this country, were held accountable by people, were sued. And I think that we have to start to think about going after people who are stealing the homes of people, pushing people out of their land, engaged in crimes against humanity, as well as genocide and apartheid. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq, and I hope that He will allow us as a community to become much more mature as we have grown considerably through this event. But I want us to truly think about what are the legal ramifications for people who violate the human rights of others overseas and also have American citizenship. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the AMP. I want to encourage everyone to support them 100%, to answer the call when called upon to engage. Go to sanctionisrael.org, make these things happen. Don't worry about the results, worry about the process. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much, Imam Suhaib Webb, for all of your incredibly important points. Next up, we have Sister Linda Sarsour. Linda Sarsour is an author, award-winning racial justice and civil rights activist, seasoned community organizer, and mother of three. Ambitious, outspoken, and independent, Linda shatters stereotypes of Muslim women while also treasuring her religious and ethnic heritage. She is a Palestinian Muslim American and a self-proclaimed pure New Yorker born and raised in Brooklyn. She is a co-founder of the first Muslim online organizing platform, Empower Change. Linda has been at the forefront of major civil rights campaigns, including calling for an end to unwarranted surveillance of New York's Muslim communities and ending police policies like stop and frisk. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you so much, Zarifa. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I am deeply honored and humbled to be with all of you today. Thank you, American Muslims for Palestine, for all the work that you do. You know, I'm a woman who usually has many words, and I've been learning how to transcribe my words in a way for people to access, telling more stories of my Palestinian family, my grandparents, my great-great-grandparents. You know, storytelling is a very important act of resistance. It is one of the most important ways that we can change the narrative, allow people to see us through our stories, not just through our pain and our oppression. So one thing I'm encouraging our Palestinian American communities across the country, and many of you have already started to do this, share photos, Share stories of your great-grandparents. Share the stories of how your parents came here to America, what villages you are from. For those of you who come from families who are Palestinian refugees, tell those stories. I have found that a lot of our fellow Americans just do not know our stories. Unfortunately, we have not been the dominant narrative. You know, there's so much horror and chaos and despair and devastation and bloodshed that we have seen, you know, of course, in the last 2 to 3 weeks. But of course, we know that Palestine and Palestinians have been experiencing this for over 70 years. But for those who've just tuned in to what the Palestinian people are enduring, please don't look away. And I ask that of our Palestinian American communities as well. Oftentimes, we wait till there is bloodshed. We wait till there is a massacre happening in Gaza, and we dedicate ourselves to posting, to educating, to being outraged, to being on the streets. What I do know as an organizer and an activist, and as someone who's a student of the civil and human rights movement of the United States of America, is this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. We have to be consistent. We have to be consistent for racial justice. We have to be consistent for Palestinian freedom. So that means that we don't just wait till there's a ceasefire and wait till there's another massacre that happens. We have to be up and organizing and supporting those on the front lines for Palestine every day and every week. And that's why I'm honored to be here today with American Muslims for Palestine. Not all of us can do this work. Not everybody can be on the front lines. Not everyone can work with an organization or for an organization that works for Palestinian liberation and the human rights of the Palestinian people. But those organizations do exist in our community, and American Muslims for Palestine is one of those organizations. So the least that we can do in this moment, is to support organizations like AMP. Whatever you have, $100, $500, $1,000, we need all the resources that you have in this moment. One of the things that I've learned doing this work is that our opposition is well-resourced. They are well-funded. And I always ask myself, I said, how is it people who are pro-apartheid, who are pro-settler colonialism, people who are pro-racism and pro-anti-Palestinian bigotry and pro-Islamophobia, how can they be more well-resourced than our communities who are pro-justice, pro-equity, pro-Palestine, pro-religious freedom? So let us organize just as our opposition organizes. You know, there was a quote one time from Dr. Martin Luther King that says that we who love peace must learn how to organize like those who love war. Sisters and brothers, we have so much work to do on so many fronts. There is the activism and organizing front, which just means that we have to stay consistent, building power within our community, showing up to rally, showing up to protest as the one that AMP and others are organizing this Saturday, May 29th. Make sure that you find a bus and that you get there to Washington, D.C. That's part of the work, organizing on your college campus, doing teach-ins, making sure that you're letting your fellow classmates know, your neighbors know about what's happening in Palestine. Then we have to organize on the political front. Sisters and brothers, I have had Palestinians and Arab Americans and even some Muslim Americans over the many years say, Sister Linda, you keep telling us go to vote. This voting situation doesn't work. Nobody cares about us. The people we're voting for are all pro-Israel. And over time, I would say that, yes, those concerns have been valid. But just over the last 2 weeks, we have been able to see with our own eyes what it looks like when we organize and we elect people like Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and Representative Cori Bush from the great state of Missouri, and people like Betty McCollum from Minnesota, and Ayanna Presley, and Jamal Bowman, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Pramila Jayapal, and Mark Pecan. We had never been able to say this many names. Chuy Garcia from Chicago, Mary Newman from the great state of Illinois. Never in my 20 years of organizing have I been able to list that many members of Congress who have taken to the House floor and actually have stood up and criticized the state of Israel and have stood and centered the voices of the Palestinian community. Of course, we cannot forget our dear sister Ilhan Omar, who really has been at the forefront of challenging Congress and challenging the dominant narrative. The other thing that I'll also say, sisters and brothers, is that when people in our community come to us who are running for office, we do this often in our communities, and I tell you, the power that we wield is more than we even estimate for ourselves. We actually underestimate our power. We can no longer just raise money for anybody running for Congress around the country. We have to also put in conditions and demands that those who will be representing our communities will represent our values. So let's make sure that we are coordinating and we are organizing and we are electing people who call for the self-determination and freedom of the Palestinian people, candidates who call for ending of the occupation and lifting the siege on the people of Gaza. One of the most important things that I'll share with you, sisters and brothers, today, and I'm speaking to our Palestinian American communities, our Muslim American communities, our Arab American communities, is solidarity. Solidarity, sisters and brothers, is it's a verb, it's action. It's not just being online or just saying something. It's not just words. Solidarity is action. Solidarity is also not transactional. It's not, I will stand for Black Lives Matter so Black Lives Matter can stand for me. I don't stand for Colombians who are also experiencing oppression so that the Colombians can stand for me. The Palestinian people are always and have been a people of solidarity. So as we fight for the liberation of Palestinians, we also need to come together and fight for the liberation of other marginalized people. I've said this many times before when people ask me as a Palestinian American, they said, Sister Linda, I see you last summer during a global pandemic. You picked yourself up and you moved to Louisville, Kentucky, and you lived there for 5 months working on the Breonna Taylor case. I went there because I'm a Palestinian, because my people are a people of solidarity. I went there because I believe that when Black people are free, we will all be free. That our oppression, our freedom, our liberation is intertwined with the freedom and liberation of others. And so I want us as Palestinian, Arab American, and Muslim communities to double down on our solidarity, because solidarity is also our survival. We as Palestinians, we cannot fight for Palestinian liberation by ourselves. We as Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, we cannot fight for our rights by ourselves. We have to see that our struggles and our liberation is bound up with others. And I want to say specifically today, and I want to be loud and clear, that it takes a lot of courage as a member of the Jewish American community to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian American community and to call for self-determination of the Palestinian people. And we have to make sure that people understand that groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, they've been with us. This is not new. They didn't show up to be in solidarity with us yesterday or the day before that or last week or 2 weeks ago. Some of us have been knowing them for at least the last 2 decades. We have had Jewish allies come stand with us and risk their own relationships within their own communities and their own access to power so that they can stand for what is right and for what is true and what we believe Judaism stands for. So I commend them. I commend our Black activists and allies who have come out in support of the Palestinian people. And we will let you know. And we hope that you have seen our demonstrated solidarity for racial justice, for the undocumented, and for other marginalized communities in these United States of America. So I'll end by saying this. I am in this for the long haul. Dr. Martin Luther King gave a speech a few days before he was assassinated, and he said to the people, I may not see the promised land. I may not get there with you, but one day, generations to come will benefit from the fruits of our labor. And so what I say to people all the time as a Palestinian American, a daughter and great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Palestinians, I will say to you that I may not see a free Palestine. And I pray that I do. But even if I don't, I know that what I do today, what I do yesterday, what I do tomorrow, what I do next week and the month after, there will be generations of Palestinians to come who will benefit from the fruit that we plant today. And so I hope that you all stay steadfast. One of the things that, and all of you know me, there's no hiding the things that I've experienced in public life here in the United States of America, and even at some of the leaders in the state of Israel who've spoken about me publicly. Don't be intimidated. Don't be afraid. The Palestinian people have sacrificed everything for us. The least that we can do is stand up, speak truth to power, and not worry about the consequences. The narrative is shifting. The pro-Israel propaganda machine is literally crumbling before our very eyes. And it is because of me and you and American Muslims for Palestine and Palestinian American leaders across many decades who've been doing this work. And because of activists and organizers and the pro-Palestine solidarity movement. Your work has not gone in vain. So for all our students on college campuses and students for justice in Palestine, stay steadfast. Don't be afraid. Don't be intimidated, and don't be silenced. I promise you, if you are not vindicated today or tomorrow, you will eventually. It is inevitable that we will be vindicated as people who are freedom lovers and justice seekers, and we will see a free Palestine. At least our great-grandchildren will see a free Palestine. So don't give up. Your ancestors never gave up. I always say to people, I've seen this before, and I've said this to folks before. I always, I'm grateful to God for everything that I have and all the blessings that I have. But one of the things that I'm most grateful for is that Allah decided for me to be Palestinian. This blood that runs through our veins is a blood of resilience. And we owe it to our families in Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank, and to Palestinian refugees across the diaspora to stand tall as Americans, to hold our government accountable, to remind our government that they too work for us. We too are taxpayers, and we should be able to decide where our taxpayer dollars go. So please follow the work of American Muslims for Palestine. Sisters and brothers, everybody has $20, $50, $100 a month to give to American Muslims for Palestine. It is a cause for justice. It is our responsibility to continue this momentum that we have. We cannot lose this momentum in this moment. I appreciate all of you. You know me, I'm not going to back down. I'm going to continue to speak truth to power, and I'm going to continue to support groups like American Muslims for Palestine. So salam alaikum, sisters and brothers, and inshallah, I'll see you on the streets.
Thank you so much, Linda Sarsour. Like our sister Linda said, organizations like AMP are providing resources and steps for you to get involved today. So please follow us on all of our platforms at AM Palestine, and don't forget to sign our petition urging the Biden administration to sanction Israel now by going to sanctionisrael.org and signing our petition. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Dr. Osama Abuirshaid, who is the executive director and a national board member of American Muslims for Palestine. He is a board member of the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations, an umbrella organization of major national American Muslim organizations. He lectures frequently on the Middle East and American politics. He's a regular commentator on Palestinian and Middle Eastern affairs, as well as on the American domestic and foreign policy on various Arabic satellite TV channels such as Al Jazeera. He authored and co-authored several books in Arabic, and he published dozens of studies and articles in Arabic and English on issues relevant to the Middle East and its political climate. Welcome, Dr. Osama Abuirshaid.
Thank you, Zarifa. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I think we all will agree that it is no longer news to say that what we are witnessing in the United States, mainly in Washington, relevant to Palestine, is unprecedented. We are seeing the tide shifting, and we are seeing more support for Palestinian rights across the United States unfolding before our own eyes in real time, including in Capitol Hill. So it is no longer a political, or it's no longer political suicide to be pro-Palestinian rights. We've seen this. We've seen members of Congress who are speaking on behalf of the Palestinians, on behalf of their rights, who are condemning the aggression on the Palestinian people by the state of Israel, who are calling Israel for what it is, who are calling out Israel for its crimes without worrying about the repercussions. That tells you that there is a real change in this country, and that people are becoming more aware of the facts. And if I would explain why is this happening now, I would say it is because of the sacrifice, the steadfastness, the resolute of the Palestinian people. They refuse to go away, and they refuse to abandon their rights, and they refuse to be defeated and to be compelled to declare or to raise the white flag. They continue to say that we're Palestinians, and they continue to stand tall on their land, and they continue to defend for their civil rights, religious rights, for their human rights. We've seen them in Jerusalem. We've seen them in the West Bank. We've seen them inside the state of Israel today, demanding justice and equality and demanding human rights. And we've seen them in the Gaza Strip, where the Palestinian people have been, or more than 2 million people have been now under a cruel blockade for over 15 years. And they still refuse to cut and run and say that we no longer want to be in this small strip of land where we're blockaded, where our movement is restricted, where we're being bombed on daily basis. So they're still standing tall on their land, and they still demand their rights, and they are inspiring the entire world to stand for their rights and for their human rights and for their independence and what they deserve to be treated no less than any human being, no more than any human being. So that is the first reason why we're seeing this shift here in the United States and across the world. The second reason is because of our collective work. It is because of the organizing that we're doing. It is because of the mobilization that we're doing. It is because of the awareness that we're raising. Now we see that this work is paying dividends. So I want everyone to believe that this is not happening in a vacuum. It is happening for a reason. It is because we are more assertive. It is because we are speaking out. It is because we are providing a voice to the voiceless. We are amplifying their rights, and we're amplifying their plight, and we're amplifying their cause. It is because of that. It is because of that. And as we cannot disconnect, as we cannot, marginalize the work of the Palestinian people and their steadfastness, we cannot marginalize the importance of our work here in America and across the world. So these are the two reasons why we're seeing this shift in America and these new dynamics in the United States in relation to the Palestinian rights. However, I don't want us to resign to a congratulatory mentality where we self-congratulate ourselves because of what we have achieved so far. I don't want us to think that this is the end of the road. I don't want us to think that what we've done is enough. It is not enough. We still have a long way ahead of us. We have a bigger potential to fulfill and that we can fulfill. All what we have to do is to believe that there is something more that we can do for Palestine. What we have done so far is very good, but it is not enough. I assure you that there is much more that can be done. I often hear dispirited people say, how long is it going to take until we have a meaningful change in America in relation to Palestine? Well, let me tell you how long it's going to take. It's not going to take much more than you abandoning this frustrated mentality, that this dependent mentality, this defeated mentality. Once you change, once you depart from this mentality, once you start believing in what you can achieve, I assure you that the road and this journey will be much, much, much shorter than what we anticipate. But we have to start with this, to believe in our abilities, to believe in what we can do, to believe in our potential, to believe that we have the resources, that we have the talent, that we have the commitment, and we are standing on the right side of history. Our cause is just. Our cause is just. You don't have to spend a lot of money to convince people about the justness of the Palestinian cause. You don't have to spend a lot of money or to invent facts or alternative facts, or to come up with alternative facts to explain what the Palestinian people are going through and what the Palestinian people are standing for and what we are struggling for here in relation of their rights. So let us believe in ourselves. That's number one. Let us believe in ourselves. Let us believe in our potential. Let us believe in our abilities. Let us believe in our capabilities. We do have the capacity. We do have the capacity to do more for Palestine. As Sister Linda just explained, it doesn't make any sense that the other side, that our opponents who know that they're defending a cruel regime, who are defending an apartheid state, who are defending a state that is that defies international law, that subjugates people, a state that has two or three or four levels of citizenship. Still, they're putting more resources to advance the cause of the state of Israel, the apartheid state of Israel, while we are still discussing and still debating whether our work will pay off or not. Let me assure you again that it is paying off. Just look around you. Just look at these new dynamics that we see unfolding before our eyes. It's unfolding in real time. In real time, we're not reading back in history about what happened back in history. We are seeing it happening now. So let us believe in our potential. Let us believe in our abilities. Let us believe in our capabilities, because I assure you, we can do more and more and more for our brothers and sisters in Palestine, for the oppressed people in Palestine. 2, let us invest right and execute immediately. So once we believe in ourselves, once we believe in our ability, once we believe in our capabilities, let us start investing right. We know how to invest. We know what needs to be done here in America. We have organizations that are advocating for the Palestinian rights. We have organizations that are providing us with blueprints of what needs to be done. We have organizations and we have leaders and experienced individuals and experienced professionals who are telling us, you know, you want to do this? This is what you do. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have the blueprint if we want to execute a plan. And I assure you that this plan does exist. All what you need is to look for it. And you don't need to look far. Just go to our website as AMP. Go to other organizations' website. We're not alone in this fight. I don't want to, give an impression that that AMP has exclusivity over the work of Palestine. We are an organization out of many. We are one organization in a broad solidarity movement for Palestine, an intersectional solidarity movement in Palestine. Sister Linda again touched on the issue of anti-Semitism. You know, we have so many Jewish comrades. We have so many Jewish friends, so many Jewish brothers and sisters here in America who are fighting with us for justice in Palestine. They deserve nothing but respect. They deserve nothing but admiration, because that moral courage is what is needed. And let me emphasize this fact. The moral courage that they're showing, that they're exhibiting, is it's much bigger than the moral courage that many of us Palestinians are showing here in America. When we sit on our butts, we continue to analyze the situation, overanalyze the situation, reanalyze the situation, and shedding tears and condemning the oppressor without doing anything about stopping his oppression. So I would tell you, anyone who stands in solidarity with any just cause is much better than many of those who are sitting doing nothing. So they deserve our respect, and they deserve to know that for us it is not about Judaism, it is not about being Jewish. They need to see that we understand that it is about oppression. And I always keep saying this, I keep always emphasizing this fact. I am a Palestinian, I am Arab, I am Muslim, and I stand against regimes that claim to speak for Islam and Muslims like Saudi Arabia and UAE, who are no less oppressors than the state of Israel. It is not about their religion. It's not about the religion of the oppressor or the identity of the oppressor or the religion or the identity of the oppressed. It is about the act itself. It is about the oppression itself. So I want us all not only to respect them, but to join hands with them and standing together to continue to advance and to broaden this movement for Palestine. So this is the second point that I wanted to make. Let us invest right. Let us execute immediately. I have heard so many times, so many people coming to me and saying, how long is this going to take? As I said before, once we abandon this dependent mentality, let us start executing immediately. Things that we could have accomplished 20 years ago, we are starting today. And if we continue with this mentality, prolonging the discussions, endless debates, it will take us another 20 years to start from the point of this point that we're in now. So this is the second point. The third point, I want you to believe in the justness of the cause of Palestine. And if you are a person of faith, I want you to believe that the Almighty will not let us down because we are doing the right thing. The Almighty will not let us down. Don't worry about how much resources the other side has. Don't worry about how much support they enjoy, political support they enjoy in Capitol Hill. That's not how you judge a situation. Look about who's standing on the right side of history. Look about what you need to worry about. Are you doing the right thing? If you are, trust me, there is no noble idea that has won without determined people. And there is no noble idea that was not in a disadvantaged position. You know, all of these great ideas that we see, all of these social justice movements that we are, you know, following today, they have started from a point of disadvantage, but they were able to change the situation. They were able to shift the tide because what they're fighting for deserves the sacrifice, and their commitment and resilience paid dividends. And if we believe in the same, if we believe the same, that we are fighting for a just cause, and we have the right, you know, the solid commitment, the firm commitment, I assure you, things will change quickly, quicker than what many of us might think. Things are changing now. Things can change more and in a faster pace. Just trust that you can do this and invest right. Let me conclude by saying this. We're all proud of our brothers and sisters in Palestine. I think they have made the entire world respect them. They've seen them in the West Bank standing before Israeli tanks with no weapons, just civilians taking into the streets, protesting the Israeli brutality. They've seen them in the Aqsa Mosque and in Jerusalem and in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood and in Al-Bustan neighborhood in Silwan. They've seen them refusing to leave their homes, regardless of what the other side is doing to them, the way Israel is brutalizing them, is terrorizing them. They earn the respect of the world. They've seen them in Gaza with this massive Israeli onslaught, destroying residential towers, destroying residential units, devastating the infrastructure there, tightening the blockade on the people of Gaza. They've seen that the day after the ceasefire, people went back to the streets, resumed their lives. It doesn't mean that they're not in pain. It doesn't mean that they're not missing a beloved one. It doesn't mean that they have a roof to sit under. But it is that resilient. It is that spirit. It is that spirit that teaches the world what it means to be on the right side of history. For them, there is nothing that they could have done to avoid this brutality being inflicted upon them. It is not something that they solicited. It is not something that they called for. And don't listen to these corrupt politicians. Don't listen to our immoral president who accused and exonerated Israel from responsibility and blamed the Arab regimes for not recognizing Israel as an independent, as he put it, independent Jewish state, for the massacre that Israel is committing. As if Israel needs independence, as if Israel needs the recognition of Arab and the Palestinians. Israel is an independent state. Israel is a state that is recognized, including by many corrupted Arab regimes today. It is the Palestinians who don't have a state of their own. It is the Palestinians who are denied self-determination. It is the Palestinians who are being murdered days and nights. It is the Palestinians who are being prevented from practicing their freedom of religion. It is the Palestinians who are being denied the right of movement and their movement is being restricted. It is the Palestinians who can't see a future. It is the Palestinians who have been deceived by the international community for decades and decades. It is the Palestinians who were told that engage in negotiations with Israel and accept the right of Israel to exist and protect Israel's security and you will enjoy a state of your own. It's been over 30 years now, and the Palestinians have seen nothing in return. For our president to accuse the Palestinians and Arabs for the crimes that are being inflicted on them by the state of Israel is immoral. And this is the least to say. This is the least to say. But you know what? At the end of the day, he's doing what he thinks is right. And we will do what we think is right. And what we think is right is that we will be more assertive, and we will make sure that all of our politicians, all of those elected officials, that our own government will hear from us, and that we will hold them accountable, and that we will continue to raise awareness, and that we will continue to broaden this movement. Now more people are becoming more sympathetic to Palestine. More Americans are more aware of the facts. More Americans are demanding an even-handed approach, a more balanced approach towards the conflict in the land of Palestine. So more people are becoming more assertive today. Let us worry about what we can do. Let us stop complaining about what the other side is doing. What the other side is doing is what they think is right. Let us do what we think is right. Let us stop obsessing about the resources that they have, the support that they enjoy. Let us broaden, let us expand our support. Let us make sure that we compete with them head to head. If they believe in what they're doing, we are no less firm in our faith, in our rights. Let us do our part. Let us do our part. Stop condemning them for doing what they believe is right. If you think what they're doing is wicked, do what is right. Come to organizations like ours. Make our brothers and sisters in Palestine proud of us as we are proud of them. It is not enough to say we commend you for your sacrifice. We commend you for your steadfastness. We commend you for your resolve. It is not enough to say this to them. It means nothing. What means something to them is to see us, that we're doing our part here in America, doing our max, our utmost to help them. That's what they expect from us. It is, policies are being made here. The ceasefire wasn't imposed until this administration and this president start feeling the heat by the progressive wing in his party. It is when Congress members like our great Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and many others, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Carson and many other members of Congress, Betty McCollum and others came together and centered Palestinian rights and sent a clear message to this president. It is not enough to pay lip service about centering human rights in your foreign policy. It is not enough if paying lip service of restoring, as he's put it, America's moral authority. America's moral authority means nothing. Means nothing if it doesn't apply to the Palestinian people. So let's do our part. They're hearing our voices now, and our voices are getting louder, and our work is becoming more effective. I want you to believe in this. I want you to believe that there is a way forward. I want you to believe that we can do more. I want you to believe that in a few years from now, you will see a whole different picture, a whole different dynamics of what we have seen so far and made us happy. I want you to believe in this. If we're seeing now resolutions being introduced in Congress to hold Israel accountable, or to hold off on ammunition and military aid to Israel, or to condemn Israel for the crimes it commits, or to condition military aid to Israel based on the apartheid regime that it's enforcing on the Palestinian people. If we are happy with this, I want you to believe that in a few years from now, we might be getting the support of the majority of a majority within Congress, within the House, or maybe the Senate, to implement these policies and to implement these resolutions. We're getting there. I'm not being over optimistic. I'm not being delusional. I know if we do our part, if we do it right, things will change. Things will change. Our people in Palestine are expecting no less from us. They're expecting no less from us. So let us come together. Let us continue this fight for justice in Palestine, freedom, equality. And when I say freedom, equality, I mean it for all. For all. We're not in the business of exclusion. We're not advocating for another apartheid system to replace the existing one. That's not what we're advocating for. We advocate for justice, freedom, equality for all. As we advocate for these values here in America, we are advocating for these values in Palestine and in every part of the world. That's what we stand for. Believe in yourself, believe in our potential, invest right, execute immediately, and believe in the justness of our cause and the inevitability that things will change very soon, inshallah. Change to the better. Things will change. Wassalamu alaikum.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Dr. Abuirshaid. We are just waiting on one final speaker. In the meantime, let me know if any of you have any questions. Oh, okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Sorry, let me give you a quick introduction. There was just a bit of a miscommunication.
No worries.
Let's see. So we have here now Dr. Omar Suleiman, and he is an American Muslim scholar, civil rights leader, writer, and public speaker. He is the founder and president of Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research and an adjunct professor of Islamic Studies at Southern Methodist University. He is also the resident scholar at the Valley Ranch Islamic Center and co-chair emeritus of Faith Forward Dallas. Everyone welcome Dr. Suleiman.
Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala. So I literally just got off of a flight. So I have not had the blessing of hearing everything that has been said. However, this cause is not just near and dear to my heart and important to me because of my own personal experiences, but this organization, particularly in the work that AMP is doing, is so crucial, so essential. Alhamdulillah, we're blessed to finally have an organization that is out front, that organizes the Muslim consciousness specifically, alongside others who come at this from other perspectives for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. And we have a clear call to action. And I think that oftentimes, we allow for the media to dictate our sympathies. And if we don't allow for the media to necessarily dictate our sympathies, we allow for our proportions to be dictated by the media. So if something is no longer the topic of the day, then that effect is felt within the community. It's felt within our protests. It's felt within our discussions and our discourse. And this has to be a time that is different. If you haven't figured out why just yet, obviously, there's the urgency for our brothers and sisters in Palestine right now. The initial causes of the humiliation of the occupation, the ethnic cleansing, the evictions, the brutality specifically around Masjid al-Aqsa, all of that which started this most recent cycle has resumed with a viciousness that is taking advantage of the media now having moved on, or a conversation that has been redirected due to a deflection that has turned away from the brutality of Israel as the primary discussion when we're talking about this issue. And so as believers, as people who are connected to this, we come to this and we say that first and foremost, we have to remind ourselves of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold us to account for what we know of that is happening of evil that we don't do anything about. And we know that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that whoever amongst you sees an evil, let them change it with their hands. And if you can't do it with your hand, then with your tongue. And if you can't do it with your tongue, then at least hate it within your heart. At the very least, you have to hate it within your heart. Now, obviously, we have the opportunity to speak. We are not living in a context in which speaking out for Palestine is impossible. In fact, we are finding that the voice for our brothers and sisters in Palestine is stronger now than ever. We're living in a context in which we're seeing a tide that is turning. However, we have to remember that we are in charge by our faith. We are entrusted with our faith to speak out of that faith when we see that evil. There's been a lot of discussion in recent days about some of those celebrities that either poorly tweeted in the first place or they walked back their stances for Palestine after the threats came their way. We can't wait for our allies or people that supposed to be at least posit themselves as our allies to speak on our behalf and to speak correctly on the record when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to Palestine. We have to speak on our own, with our own voice, with the full facts and without being ambiguous about that which we are speaking about, nor of the call to action that we are calling for. And so here you have a call to action that is very clear, sanctionisrael.org, that you can't pay lip service to this, that the rhetoric of both sides and empty platitudes to peace only allow for cover for the side that has disproportionate power and is guilty of disproportionate abuses to continue to do so, though it may be more gradual and without any type of accountability, because it uses the cover of both sides. So we have to speak with clear rhetoric. We have to demand clear policy changes. And we have to make sure that we don't abandon our brothers and sisters when they are out of sight when it comes to the media. And I want to, inshallah ta'ala, just leave you all with a few things to think about in this regard. SubhanAllah, the dehumanization of the Palestinians is, it's not ambiguous at all. It's very easy to detect in the way that people speak about this cause. The way that the casualty numbers are casually put out there without any type of regard for how disproportionate the Palestinian casualties to the Israeli casualties are. The way that the children are spoken about, the way that we quickly become collateral damage to a war that we are quickly blamed for. You see the dehumanization, the way that apartheid and occupation is justified because people are deemed to be too barbaric or to be savages and unable to coexist with any type of people and unable to exist with any other group of people and unable to be dealt with civilly because they are not a civilized people. All of that rhetoric that comes out. It's kind of my first experience of being turned away from Palestine, because I actually want to speak about that. I remember, going to the border with an American passport to visit for the first time on the way, on the infamous Jisr, the bridge from Jordan to the occupied territories. And I remember, this being a time that I was looking forward to meet family members that I had not been able to meet before, to see land that was supposedly written to my name that I had not known about before, or had not been able to visit myself, to visit Masjid al-Aqsa. And that dehumanization at the border, and at that time I was just a teenager, I hadn't even started any type of activism, was the worst that I had ever seen before. Not only that, but the words that were used after I was eventually just turned away altogether were that because your cousin, because your family is this, and your family are these people, and this person is this person, this person is that person. The injustice of that moment, subhanAllah, I will never forget. And that is something that stayed with me for the rest of my life, right? And then, year after year, I see people that are able to go and visit, that take pictures in Al-Aqsa, that are able to go to that land. And I think to myself, why is it that people don't see a problem with this? And especially, of course, those that have to live under the occupation, that are not just turned away from a border, but those that have to live under an occupation, that have to live under bombardment, that have to live under this humiliation, subhanAllah, but they do it with such honor. They do it with such power. They still stand up for themselves. Even when the world turns their backs on them, they stand up with their backs straight, with their hearts full of faith, and they face their oppressors. And they have this resounding message every single time that you will not break us, that while the casualty counts will always be disproportionate, while the buildings that will be destroyed on the Palestinian side will always be so much more, that the civilian count will always be horrific, that all of these factors will be stacked up against us, that you will not break us. That whether it is called an intifada, an uprising or not, that we are always in a state of uprising, that we're always in a state of resisting occupation, that, even when these police go out and they arrest hundreds of people at a time, thousands of people at a time, when, the army, when you have army generals that will say that they are venting frustration on civilians in Gaza, when you have people that are, being treated this way on Vice documentaries, right? That we will continue to stand proud, and we will continue to insist on our existence. And our existence is a form of resistance. And that is certainly true for the Palestinian people who, have refused to be wiped out, have refused to give up, have refused to leave without any sense of connection, without showing that they will insist that their feet will be firmly planted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And my last khutbah was about this idea, by the way, of courage, how we learn courage from the Palestinians. And I want to actually share with you all, a verse that comes to my mind in Tansurullahi yansurkum wa yuthabbit aqdamakum. That if you support Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or if you support the cause of Allah, if you are amongst those that are on the side of righteousness, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will support you. وَيُثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَكُمْ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will firmly plant your feet. And I want to talk about this ayah, inshallah ta'ala, for a moment. When we talk about the answer to our prayers and the idea of Allah supporting us, and how we don't understand timelines, and sometimes we don't understand the way that things play out, and we embrace everything that comes our way as a form of expiation or elevation, that we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not abandoned us. That this is often in regards to, again, the idea of delayed answers to dua, delayed, not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was unable to fulfill them right away, but delayed out of his divine wisdom, or, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in mysterious ways. So we talk about this multiple times. And so in Tansurullahi yansurkum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will support you if you support the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That part is sometimes hard for us to understand. How? We know for sure that he does, but we often are not able to decipher how he does, because we are so limited in our senses and in our perception. However, the second part of that, يُثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَكُمْ, Allah will firmly plant your feet. That part is so easy for us to observe as a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon a people, as a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the rest of the world, that you can see what it looks like when a people manifest courage, when a people have their hearts full of faith, and that firmly plants them in the ground. You can see that literally with the Palestinians, their feet firmly planted in their land, unwilling to leave, unwilling to be humiliated, unwilling to be ethnically cleansed, unwilling to be occupied in terms of their hearts and their spirits and their faith. And that is the iman that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in their hearts that causes their feet to be so firmly planted. And so while sometimes it's hard for us to see yansurkum, how the nusra, how the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is manifesting itself in our own lives and in the lives of our brothers and sisters, it is very evident how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has firmly planted their feet. And we are an ummah of do the best that you can. Ittaqullaha mastata'tum. To do what we can that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask us about what is in our capacity. And sometimes we don't understand our capacity until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases it. As we do the best that we can, we see that the best that we can is sometimes better than what we thought it was. That our maximum is extended, and we constantly see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us capable of once we connect ourselves to Him. That is true for our brothers and sisters there, and that is true for our brothers and sisters here, those of us who are advocating on their behalf. That it might be a small effort, it might be a small dua, emphasis on small here being a quotation, not necessarily small in the sight of Allah, but small in the way that we might see it, that leads to glorious things happening, that leads to great things happening. And so I know that a lot of people see these types of calls to action and they say, nothing's ever going to change here in regards to Palestine. Nothing's ever going to happen in regards to Palestine. Don't be one of those people that does not do their part. Do your part, inshallah ta'ala. Partake in these efforts and make sure that you keep the pressure up. Now is not a time to tone it down. Now is a time, inshallah ta'ala, to amp it up, and AMP here being AMP, American Muslims for Palestine, inshallah. May Allah bless you all for joining. And I apologize that I joined a bit late. I literally just got off a flight to join you all tonight, and just to lend my support to this wonderful cause. Jazakumullahu khairan, and I'll pass it back to you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Omar Suleiman, for your inspiring message and all of the work that you do. Thank you to all of our amazing speakers tonight and everyone who attended. Again, to support this campaign, just go to sanctionisrael.org and sign our petition. We are 49% away from our goal. Also, please consider joining us on Saturday at our protest in Washington, D.C. We expect thousands to attend, and I'm sure that none of you want to miss it. Through this campaign and all of our organizing, we are truly showing the Biden administration and the world how much we in the U.S. support Palestine and an end to the Israeli occupation. And thank you for all of the efforts that all of you have done to get that message across. Have a great night, everyone, and ma salama.